Hello and welcome. I'm Xiomara. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the founder and CEO at Promise 54. I am excited to welcome you into this space. Thanks so much for coming together. It is undeniable that resistance and backlash to equity work in this country is increasing, much of it from radical conservatives looking to derail our work toward justice and liberation. Most recent Supreme Court decisions being among the latest in this ongoing trend. The trend, though, of course, is not surprising. We've seen these predictable waves of resistance and backlash over time throughout our nation's history. And our work continues in spite of the distractions and the setbacks because it must. But a lot of it happens on the backs of Black and Brown leaders who have themselves worked their way into positions of influence up and through the very same flawed institutions and systems built to inhibit their success. This Headwinds series is designed to be an intimate, organic 4-part series of conversations with some of those very BIPOC leaders working to advance educational equity amidst significant resistance, backlash, and increasing headwinds. Our hope is to support and amplify their work and to provide an opportunity for all of us to connect and support each other in our ongoing fight toward justice. In today's discussion, we'll have the opportunity to engage with some phenomenal powerhouses. Jean-Claude Brizard, the president and CEO of Digital Promise, and Kira Orange-Jones, the CEO of Teach Plus, are both at the helm of national organizations working to advance equity and racial justice across different regions with materially different sociopolitical contexts, all while keeping staff, board, and community engaged and aligned in the work. To guide us in this conversation, we are so lucky to have with us Heather Harding, who is the CEO of the Campaign for Our Shared Future and serves on our Promise 54 board in her free time. So thank you all for being here, and Heather, over to you to introduce yourself and kick us off.
There's a practice at Promise 54 of introducing ourselves in the most humane and centered ways. So I will quickly model and then kick to my very good friends, all colleagues that I've known for so many years. And so excited to have some time with you all today. But I'm Heather Harding. I'm living here in Washington, D.C. with 2 very active teenagers. So I think of myself as an educator and a mom first. In public education in K-12 for the entirety of the 30-year career, y'all. It's getting thick in here. I'm on fire today because I was just watching the clips from the supplemental curriculum that's been approved in Florida from PragerU. I won't talk about it. And I love karaoke and I love being Black and I'm excited to be here today. Correct. So Jean-Claude and Kira, let's go to Kira. You go ahead and introduce yourself and then we'll get into this conversation.
I love you. I'm so happy I get to do this with you both because I care so much for you both. So this is a pleasure. It's good to be here. I'm Kira Orange-Jones. As Xiomara said, I am the current CEO of Teach Plus, which is a national nonpartisan organization that believes that teacher leadership and agency is essential to solutioning in this country. And we believe that teacher leadership everywhere from the classroom all the way to the Capitol can have a huge impact on the kinds of solutions we co-create with our communities and schools. And so I am just rounding my first year, and it's been a really, really exciting and really honestly humbling privilege to be at the helm of the organization in this organization at this moment in time. The way I like to introduce myself mostly is just by saying I am my mother's daughter in every way. My mother's a 35-year veteran educator of New York City Board of Ed, special education teacher. I come from a long, proud line of Afro-Latino teachers in the Bronx. All my cousins are educators, all my aunts are educators. And so it was probably no surprise that I would to them that I would become an educator, but that certainly was not what I thought would happen in my own life. Although I did struggle in school quite a bit, and it was really teachers that made a significant impact in helping me chart a course for my own future. And, you know, it wasn't just the academic, you know, support that teachers provided me throughout high school, which were my hardest years, but really also the advocacy. When I was applying to college, we had to cast a very wide net because it was not entirely clear that that would be my next step. I was waitlisted. I was rejected from many, many schools and waitlisted at one. And it was my 9th grade English teacher, who was also my advisor, Geraldine Woods, who got on the phone with the admissions office at this particular college and advocated for me to get an interview. And they said, "We're not taking anybody off the wait list. And you have to meet this young woman. You have to interview her." And she did. And she also paid for my bus fare to take the 4.5-hour ride to the school. And the rest is history, right? And so I think in that moment, I learned the powerful role that teachers play, not just academically, but also as powerful advocates and models. In many ways, I learned from her in that example what it would look like for me to begin to advocate for myself in my own education. So it feels like a full circle moment now to be at the helm of an organization that is dedicated to helping teachers across this country really advocate in all the many ways that we need to for our children and our communities. So that's a little bit about me. I also dabble in policy directly. I've been on the State Board of Education in my great state of Louisiana for the past 12 years, and three elections, and through that lens have learned quite a bit. I'm one of 2 Democrats on our state board, elected Democrats on our 11-person board, and have navigated many different challenges over the years and opportunities in trying to weave together a bipartisan agenda that works for kids. So, JC, Kinsey.
Kira, thank you. It's been great to watch Kira's journey over the last 13 years, including the first time you were in for office in Louisiana. So it's great to be here with you and Heather. I have a colleague here at Digital Promise who says that she can't separate herself from her personal journey and herself from her professional work. I would argue it's the same for me as well. Let me take a global perspective to this. I was born in Haiti to parents who had to escape a despot in 1970, to a grandfather who spent 6 years in prison as a political prisoner under the same despot in the 1960s. And what they taught me was all the work around social justice and the ways in which we fight for people. I don't think that DNA has ever left me. I went to school to become a chemist, landed in teaching. My parents were teachers too, Kira. Landed in teaching. My first job was Rikers Island, New York, teaching in a prison. And that has colored my perspective ever since 35 years ago. It still remains with me. Every job I've had has been in places, in schools with kids who we refer to here as the Digital Promise as historically and systematically excluded from full participation. So that DNA remains. So I'm the president and CEO of Digital Promise. I've been here about 2.5 years. Before that, I was at the Gates Foundation, but I was also a school superintendent twice, leading Chicago Public Schools, and before that, Rochester, New York. And Kira also spent 22 years of my life in New York City Public Schools, not counting the days when I was a student there. At Digital Promise, we say we work along 3 circles. Research, we've got about 50 PhDs, all researchers doing work along every aspect of learning science and developmental sciences. We do work with a lot of practitioners, 300 school districts, 150 of which are called the League of Innovative Schools. And we work with about 35 countries with teachers, you name it. We work along the entire continuum with practitioners. The last circle is one of innovation, mostly technological innovation. So AI, we've been doing AI work for 3 years. ChatGPT did not make us aware of AI in education. But when you combine the 3, it sort of moves us toward our impact goals. And I'll name just one of them, which is the next 7 to 8 years, 30 million kids in America having access to economic mobility, well-being, and personal agency. So for us, that is the sort of the impact goal, North Star, in which we actually are moving, and the way we look at the world, at least to the US mainland.
Thank you both for both compelling and human-centered responses, but also, the thread here, which is that this is about who we are at our core and the work. So our hope is to have an intimate, natural conversation. And I, like I said, came in here a little bit on fire this morning. I lead this campaign called our Campaign for Our Shared Future. And, I don't think I've really talked to either of you since leaving the world of philanthropy, like in depth. So this is an opportunity. The campaign we're a time-bound, nonpartisan campaign to defend and support public education in all its forms. And these anti-equity legislative efforts by an extreme minority in the state legislatures sort of caught fire 18 months ago and have continued to be the gift that keep on giving. I say that a little bit of tongue in cheek in that for the 30 years that I've been in K-12, I've wanted public education and public schools to be at the forefront of the political agenda, not in this way. And in fact, I left philanthropy because public education is so foundational to our democracy. And coming out of a global pandemic, it's really unfair that folks have co-opted the real needs of students and families for a political agenda. This is political theater. They are the minority, and yet there's a lot of noise out there. So this morning, my team was combing through the press, and there are these clips from Prager University, which is an extremist fake university curriculum. And in one of the clips, they're on the YouTube, they're cartoons, they're aimed at children, and one of them appropriates the voice of Frederick Douglass, y'all. Defending the founding fathers and slavery. I was so angry. I'm an optimist. I try to be, positive, etc. But I was so angry at the manipulation and the claims of a lot of these extremist groups is that we're indoctrinating the children, and this blatant propaganda and indoctrination. And the way it gets in the way of all of us understanding what we've overcome together, I was just livid. Anyway, so how are y'all dealing with this? You're national organizations, you work in different parts of the country, and while I will acknowledge that there are some states and locales that are under much more direct attack than others, I want to tell you that the chilling effect that we see at the campaign offering supports and pushing back is overwhelming to me.
Yeah.
So I would love for you guys to say, I don't know if you've seen the clip, but tell me about it. But also just tell me how your educators and your work is being affected by these attacks.
JC, start. I'll follow.
I'm happy to. I was talking to a colleague of mine. I was born and raised in Poland, and she was channeling what I was thinking, which is we have seen this in other places. She saw it in Poland. I saw it in Haiti growing up as a young child, at least when I begin to be more conscious of this kind of work. To see it now happening in America, is just disturbing and terrifying. Lately, I've been obsessed with a bunch of stuff. There's a series on Netflix, which is tongue-in-cheek titled How to Become a Despot. And if you watch the playbook, it wasn't different with Idi Amin, with Hitler. You name the despot in history, the playbook remains the same, and we're watching it happening in America. I think, frankly, it goes back to the way in which we teach, right? The ideas of multiple texts, multiple perspectives, teaching young people how to make decisions based on what is true and what is not, is something we have to find ways to double down on. But to your point on educators, we have, again, the League of Innovative Schools, and we have these sort of closed door conversations about how folks are feeling. These are system leaders. One, for example, will say to us, I can't even use the word equity in my district. And he's in Alabama. So we have, again, all these states and places, and these folks are coming together and they're letting their hair down. And they're saying things like, we're killing babies in schools, we're shooting them to death. And what folks seem to care about is who's identifying as gay or not, right? And we're moving books from libraries. So all to say is that we're trying to guide our superintendents to navigate this in a way that has them focus on the work and to try to mitigate the politics as much as possible. But no joking aside, they're losing staff. They're losing teachers who will not operate in these conditions. These folks are under the gun and frankly are under siege. So we're trying to best way possible to a collective find ways of supporting each other in this particular time that we're dealing with.
Yeah, that resonates. Look, I think our teachers are in the middle of it, and we support teachers across a broad range of political context. And I would say the overwhelming majority of our staff, our teachers, this is something that they are acutely aware of, right, and are navigating. I was in a meeting last night with a handful of our teachers, and this particular teacher teaches in the Midwest, and was explaining not only is it about the language around equity that has gotten completely extracted from the conversation, but that also means that he's struggling to make basic points about subgroup analysis, like just the discussion of race in the context of analyzing data to have a better understanding of how students are performing is under attack. And he's sort of coming with a problem protocol that we're trying to help him solve around how is he going to transparently share the data, right, as being responsible. He's a curriculum chair, and he's trying to sort of share data with the school around a certain grade level's performance, but has been directly told by his principal and higher ups that like they need to do that in a way that doesn't in any way call out certain races, right, in terms of performance, right? So there is a amount of, I think, cognitive stress, right, that our educators are living in and navigating every day, where they feel like they have to literally wake up in the morning and like literally put on their armor and go to work. And this is a terrain that they're navigating. And there's a practical component of this, which is like, how do we give them the tools, the language, the skill set to be able to navigate and continue to do the important work of advocating and educating their incredible students when full discursive terrains have been taken away, full languages have been removed. And that is incredibly concerning, right? And, at the policy level, right, which I also have the privilege of being at, I think about the amount of noise and space this takes up in any policy discussion at the most macro level, right? In my state, we oversee the educational experiences of over 750,000 children across Louisiana. And in just the last 3 years alone, I would argue that over, 70% of the noise, right, that our board has had to be navigating various, challenges that really started well before. I mean, sort of the mask man, like all of the sort of history of this that sort of started at the height of the pandemic. We know versions of this started long before, has been occupying the majority of our time and space and energy. And so you can imagine if that's where the time is going and not going to basic fundamental, requirements and responsibilities we have as a policymaking board to actually create the conditions for educators to be successful and do their jobs alongside our families and children. This is happening at scale, right? So it is a major challenge, Heather. I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah. Heather, can I one lay before we move on to the next, go back to Kira's point. Some of us may think this doesn't happen, for example, in Connecticut or New York, it happened in Alabama. What we're seeing is that a single board member in, say, a liberal town can hold a leader hostage by asking for FOIA requests and everything else, just keep them busy on nonsense and keep them from doing the work they need to actually get done. So it's happening across the US. I would argue just about every state in this country.
Yeah, I want to pull back on this issue, two issues that you guys raise, and y'all get active in the chat. I know you got questions. I know, just feed them over. We'll get to all of them. First of all, the noise and the space that this takes up in public discussion and also in policy discussion is overwhelming. But I want to say one thing that we've learned over the last 18 months of the campaign, which is that we cannot let it go unanswered, even as we are tired. And the coalition of reasonable people is broad enough, but we've got to figure out where we agree and speak up, because for at least the first 10 months of this, y'all, people were quiet because it seemed extreme and fringe and crazy. Those things are not untrue. And yet the silence is incredibly, it's detrimental. Like, I know, Kira, you could tell us as an elected, as an official, like not having the cover, and superintendents, same thing. Like, you've got to have cover to push back on this. So I want to put that out there. The other thing that I was hearing you all talk about, and I want to ask the question directly, is that at the campaign, we've done a lot of like message training and comms and research and polling in order to stay in that common ground space, because I think that's important. So what do 70%, 80% of Americans want from their schools? And it's a real question if you're a service provider around whether or not you can continue to use this language that's been co-opted.
Right.
And be in integrity with your values. I feel that tension every day with so many colleagues, but I wonder how you all are navigating it. I think it's important to be honest, but also we got babies to serve, right? Like,
Yeah.
how are you doing that?
Happy to go first, Kira. So I mean, Heather, it's a great question. Part of it is exactly what you described, right? It's a kind of media training, communications training that our leaders sometimes need in navigating certain keywords. For example, understand what the trigger words may be in different parts of different kinds of communities. There are people who are doing that, who are supporting, we've partnered with some supporting our league. Again, we're talking about innovation, we're talking about learning science, etc. But we also know without leadership, we're going to lose these individuals. We lost last year maybe 4 of our best superintendents, most innovative superintendents who actually walked away, not just from the job, from the profession itself, right? So one thing that we are beginning to partner and see is for one group in particular in the Midwest, who not only sort of curating board members who run for office, but also going to the parties who nominate these people. So placing folks in the Democratic Party machine, placing folks in the Republican Party machine, who then will appoint the right people, put the R and the D next to their name so they can run for office. Keeping the district leader out of the fray, out of the conversation for protection, but working within the political machine to get things actually happen. But to your point, I think the idea of collective action, collective effort makes this important. The idea of making noise, I think, is also very important. So we're not silent, but somehow the folks who have to make the noise cannot be the ones who are leading the systems. Otherwise, they run the risk of being pushed out. So how do you flank them with the right kind of environments and people and organizations to make it happen? Within our structure here at Digital Promise, we tend to do that within our League of Innovative Schools meetings and convenings. Again, it's voluntary. It's who wants to come. We provide a kind of support for folks in navigating these kinds of conditions. We also partner with other nonprofits, large nonprofits who are facing very similar issues, and bending together. How do we support these leaders and sustain that leadership in place?
Yeah, so when I joined Teach Plus a year ago, I inherited a growth plan that was, 2/3 complete, and we're in the final stage. And as part of that plan, we had collected much data from across our network and, and our staff about, the important work of taking on DEIA courageously, and a real call to action that our staff and our teachers had for us as an organization to take this work on alongside them. And so that was a no-brainer, and I agreed with that priority, and it was one of the things that I prioritized. One of the first things I did was hire Promise 54 to partner to do this work and to help us structure it with a committee and ultimately roll out a set of DEIA definitions and a belief statement, and ultimately put a plan in place that we plan to implement, right? Seems straightforward enough, right? And at we've been now on this journey for almost 8 months, and at every stage, it has been not only the challenging work of landing a definition that reflects our own values, which is, our aspirations for this body of work that informs our strategy as an organization. That's the work we sign on for. But at every single stage, we've had to step back and say, but wait a second, what is this going to look like when we roll it out? Are we going to is this language on the front page of our website going to actually create blowback? Oh my goodness, what does it mean to be in the blast cone? What does it mean to be a woman of color in the blast cone in my first year as CEO, and wanting to advance this work courageously, but feeling like I'm still learning and developing my own skill set on how to do this in the political domain that this has become, right? This is no longer just sort of bold, courageous, organizational, programmatic work. This is inherently political work. right? And so I find myself relying more on like my political capabilities that I've learned in a whole other dimension of my life, because that is essentially the nature of the work, and having to build those capacities across our entire staff, right? Like helping them understand the layers, right? Because what we have also from, I think our team that is, I think mostly progressive, not exclusively, but I would say overwhelmingly progressive, is, and especially in cases where, their focus directly may be on working front facing with teachers, or maybe they don't have the daily exposure to some of what we've been discussing, is a real push to like say the thing, put the thing as the thing on the website. There is no other thing to actually discuss. And finding myself and my leadership team having to stand in the gap and be like, yes, that is true. We want to be courageous, but here's the consequence of saying the thing. And we've got to actually weigh those trade-offs and ask ourselves, is that really what we want? If it's actually going to shut down our work in multiple sites, we already know, right?
Yes.
And that's been really challenging to kind of help navigate and bring people along and into at multiple layers of the organization.
Do y'all, do both of you identify with the ed reform identity? Are you ed reformers? Just
yes.
I don't know what that means anymore, Heather.
no, okay, no. Okay, all right. Well, what about last year? Would you have said, yes, I'm an ed reformer? Like, let me give you some.
Yes, I
No,
certainly
I mean,
have been called that.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, but I've always been sort of nuanced in the way I approach
Yes.
this. Every from version 1 is gone. But to this conversation too, it's about redefining success. And you'll find more common ground, I think, in a broader definition of success, meaning that the idea of economic mobility, I don't know if any community would turn that down, whether you go in rural Alabama to Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah.
Everyone cares about that. So
Yeah.
one thing I have found, by the way, is that most systems leaders have never gone through media training.
Yes.
I know I did twice. Abroad was my first time. And that helps me understand the kind of ways in which you connect with community, whatever the community is, and navigate these kinds of things. Again, nothing is foolproof, but to a point, I think was animated point in the chat, is that, there's a tipping point, right? Where you begin to lose your soul, where you begin to lose your core values. You don't go there. I mean, I tell people, these are our core values as an organization. We will not negotiate them. If it means that our work shrinks by 10%, then so be it. At the same time, I don't need to go out and put a banner on I-95 to claim we're doing equity work. Sometimes my colleague of mine, Polly Seling, often says, the work of equity is doing the work. So what does that look like versus putting a banner on a website?
JC, you out here preaching. I mean, here's the thing, like I honestly, because I know you all and I trust you and we understand the values, none of us, I don't know, I'll speak for me. You could co-sign if you want. As a Black woman in ed reform for 30 years, I always had to hold on to some nuance around what the systemic impact of racism, classism, and misogyny were doing to me as a person, and then thinking about how I show up for the younger me, right?
Yes.
So understanding that these coalitions that we engage in and the ways we identify as an ed reformer, as an American, as an educator, that all those things come to play, and we're constantly making trade-offs so that we can be in service. And one of the things that I think is so important is understanding when you can reach out your hand to be in partnership.
Yeah.
And where you have to call others to task for their better selves. This thing around the divisive concepts, like who gets hurt when we talk about racism and whose pain matters.
Yeah.
Those things are so key to us really talking about and unpacking. It's also true that when you take the race out of the Rosa Parks story, that doesn't just hurt Black children. It hurts white children. How are they going to understand how we came together and ended something so oppressive and inhumane if we don't talk about it. And I think like helping people do that work, helping them understand what's political, but also what's like just required of your values.
Yeah.
Those are, it's hard stuff out here. Like
It's
we
so
are in the thick.
Yeah.
It's
So,
so hard.
yeah.
It's-
Heather,
oh,
okay.
I
Go
was
ahead, please. Go
gonna
ahead.
say-
Go ahead.
Should I go? I'll go.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I was just gonna, Heather, look, I feel like you and I've had a version of this conversation for decades, right? Because I think I've always seen myself as a pragmatist when it comes to advancing a student-centered agenda. I've had to work on all sides of the aisle my whole career, right, in order to pursue a set of meaningful, sustained outcomes, right, in the context in which I live and work. And I prided myself on that, right? I was part of the first all-female leadership team on the State Board of Education, and it was me as a Afro-Latina Democrat from New Orleans, and two white conservative Republican women, the three of us making up the senior leadership team and myself being the vice president during the height of the pandemic and the years following. And I prided myself on like building the types of relationships where we could have the hard conversations, we could see each other's point of view, develop respect and trust, and then put an agenda forward that we thought was right and as separate and apart from politics as possible, right? Polarization is possible. And I think for the large part at the beginning we did. And what I saw happen over time was that kind of ability to sort of hold that common ground became more and more challenged as my colleagues, these are dear colleagues who I came to love and trust, were getting more and more pressure and pulled further and further over to the crazy, right? And I think that frankly happens on both sides. I don't think that's I understand this particular challenge happens to be the far right, but it isn't just the far right that's creating those polls. I have to be honest. And so I just think there's something about figuring out how to capture the imagination of the middle. And there's way more in the middle than we are even thinking about. And so to your point, Heather, about when the skill set on when to call out, but when to find opportunities to really call in and help people develop those capabilities is our only chance at winning, because we can't win if it just remains sort of the polls at all. And so that's the work that I've been up to. It is incredibly exhausting because identity is so bound up in this for the reasons that you've shared, Heather, and others, but it is necessary, and I still remain optimistic that is our greatest path forward.
Really well said, Kira. I hate to follow that. It was terrific. What I was going to say with Heather's push, that this hurts white kids as much as it hurts Black kids. I mean, there's a gentleman, Antonio Saunders, we're beginning to work with here at Digital Promise, about this idea of collective humanity. Let's ground ourselves in that collective humanity, right? We have to understand each of our own identities, how it comes create this collective that is our society. And to Kira's point, how do we get perhaps the more silent middle to really actively engage in these conversations? Otherwise, the fringes take over. Right, and we lose our country, we lose our society, we lose our world. But I can tell you too, like just having traveled internationally quite a bit last year, there's a lot of folks outside the US who are watching to see how we actually handle this.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
closing for a second.
It made me think while you guys were talking, and also I'm looking at the chat. So media training is important, and doing it with integrity is entirely possible. I want you all to know that. I also think that K-12 has a particular kind of narrow view of politics. And in part, we have to recognize the political theater. You fight with different tools than evidence-based and technical conversations. So making the language plain has been a long goal of our movement, and yet we haven't done very good at it. We have to get really good at it very fast, because the misinformation that exists in our political sphere right now is incredibly strong and well-funded, and it's just it's just an onslaught of it. So this issue around language, taking your staff through an understanding of what our values are and what language we are going to use and why we are using the language. And if you cannot get with that, what other work you can do. Because I like to also talk about this as like, we're a choir. We are a choir. There are sopranos out there and there are tenors. And so everybody may not be singing the same part, but overall, we want to protect and promote a public education system that serves all children well. And we haven't accomplished that yet. And so we can't start dismantling it towards some kind of individualistic society that, we know doesn't work. We've already seen that. Also, Kiera mentioned self-care, and it wouldn't be a Promise 54 gathering if we didn't actually talk about how we take care of ourselves in this moment. And so I'm wondering how you guys are doing that. I will be really honest, like since taking this job, I've gained 25 pounds. I'm worried about my blood pressure. I'm really tired. Philanthropy of where I came, they are not supporting me to the level I need. I need for rich people to figure this out. But I do feel like, and I'm old enough and wise enough to like figure out when I need to take care of myself and sleep and do all the things and ask for help. But I think there is that it's existential, right? Like, oh, every day when I'm feeling down, I'd say hashtag save the democracy. This is my shit too. Excuse me. Do y'all curse on these things? This is my country too. I'm not going to let it go down like this. So how are you guys doing that for yourself, but also for your teams? Because we at the campaign, we're always rolling and, we try to find little ways to give flexibility and support.
I love that you asked the question. First of all, you're doing the Lord's work. You and I haven't talked about it, but I'm very aware of what you're doing because you are changing the entire context and conversation. And I just need to say thank you publicly for what you are doing to help all of us, right, find a path forward. The work that I have been up to the last several years, particularly leading this during this type of crazy during the pandemic almost killed me, right? A year ago, I was diagnosed with 12 fibroid tumors. One was the size of a small watermelon. Like I had to get emergency surgery. They had been developing for years over the course of the pandemic, mostly stress related, and ultimately had to get a massive operation, right? And literally almost died. And I think a lot of it was the stress of this particular thing and the psychic toll over time that it took, right? And so coming off the heels of that, I changed my whole life. I feel like I'm all about self-care now, right? Like I am living my very best life. And a lot of that is because I had to learn the hard way that other alternative wasn't working for me anymore. And I wasn't willing to give that anymore of myself. So I'm doing all the things. I am doing all the things, all the wellness things, and we can have a whole different meeting about that. But what I will say is I've tried to sort of gift that also to my team during this time, right? Like we're just back from a full staff retreat at Lone Rock Educational Facility in Bailey, Colorado, where I took all my team. Half the day was, of course, strategy work, important retreat type of work that we would do only when we're together once a year. But part of it was also about in the morning, like giving them the chance to sleep in if they wanted to, or yoga, or paint, or like modeling and creating the actual systems and rituals at every level of my organization where we can all understand the important value of rest as a means of restoring and coming back to give more, and really trying to walk the walk on that, because for so many years I didn't. And I know what it did to my body. I can only imagine at scale, given the roles I had, what that could have done to others, not creating that kind of space. So I'm really committed to that. And yes, rest is resistance, in my opinion. But we've had to structure it and build it into the rituals and the socializing and the language. And especially as a woman of color, Black woman particularly, like we are often identified and find value from our labor. Right. And so being able to work specifically with BIPOC women on my team and help them specifically feel permission to live into that has been a really big part of, I think, my work at Teach Plus. Yeah.
So yes, to everything Kara just mentioned, and I've not frankly been the kind of person who understood really how to rest, but I'm learning. Last 2 weeks ago, a bunch of us were at Aspen for the Aspen Institute's Action Forum, and Pahar Institute those of you in the audience who are Paharans, were a big part of this convening. The focus was on courage, healing, and repair. And many of us, very type A, pushy kind of people, were forced to take a step back and understand. We even had a medicine woman do sound healing with the group, which was absolutely powerful. So it took a lot of us back to step back. But the one add I want to put to this conversation is that there's a connection between that, Heather, Kira, and strategy for solving this, right? So, for example, we have an all-staff retreat. We're going to go to Albuquerque, and we're going to immerse ourselves in this idea about collective humanity, this idea of focusing on the twice colonized people, again, our indigenous nations folks, and then talk about really our impact goals. So connection between self, humanity, a specific population, and the work is a way of stepping back. We're not going to focus on logic models, but instead we're going to focus on us as humans, as humanity, and step back so we can regroup and push on the work forward. Without putting a mask on first, there's no way I don't think anyone can actually accomplish what needs to be done.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. It's a privilege. We got to recognize it as that, and we have to make sure that it gets to a lot more of folks. My team would kill me if I didn't also remind you that other place that this battle is laying out is school board. Almost 30,000 school board seats will be decided in 2023, the bulk of which will be in November. So if you personally do not know where your school board is, if there's a race in your area or when your family, please go out and find those. At the campaign, we're going to be doing endorsements and looking for equity-minded candidates across the political. But for real, y'all, this is a big deal. Big states, Connecticut, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio. And so this is also an area where we haven't really, as K-12 and reform folks and just folks who've been working at service, we haven't really paid that much attention. It's a big, important job, as Jean-Claude could tell you, having been in the seat reporting to boards. I wonder, you want to have like a last word on that, but also on like in any inspirational pieces, and then I'll turn back over.
Yeah,
We lost Kira, but she'll get her back.
Yes, thank you. I've been waiting for it to come back. I mean, what you're saying is so critical and important. The four leaders we lost last year as part of our league all left because of school boards. And in one case in Indiana was one new board member, who actually was arrested for going into classrooms, taking pictures of artifacts and kids, claiming that there was woke discussions actually happening. He walked away from the job. But that's exactly right. Politicians love low turnout because they can manage the numbers. And school boards elections are notorious for having low turnout. So whatever folks can do in their own community to make sure that they raise awareness around the elections will be critical. Again, one person can derail an entire agenda. I remember, for example, when I was in Rochester, New York, I had 7 board members. I mean, 3 were absolutely out of their mind. I had four, but I learned to count to 5, not 4, because it can flip very, very easily. One used to walk the streets at 2 a.m. with an empty briefcase, sometimes with 8-track tapes inside of it. That's how crazy my board was. But at the same time, I had to keep figuring out how to work the city politics and putting pressure on them to make decisions. To be frank, one time I actually had the local paper do a headline. I gave them an exclusive just to force a 7-0 vote to do right by special ed kids. So I have colleagues who have said to me, I came to do this job because I wanted to fix literacy and math, right? I said, well, that's great, but no, your job is to flank and create the buffer so your folks can do the job. This is very political, has always been political. This time in our history is much more difficult than it has been in the past, but the job of a systems leader often is to flank, create buffers, and to protect the people who are doing the work. Without that, frankly, your people get mired into the craziness we see in communities. It's a stressful thing. And by the way, one last thing I'll say on this is I have watched a lot of my mentors and colleagues die as a superintendent, mostly women of color, to be frank, because of the stress of this job. So, I mean, I'll say again, for many of us here at Digital Promise, the work of equity is doing the work. We use the expression historically systematically excluded. We don't mince words, especially internally, what needs to be done, but we always connect that work, heart, and strategy and say, what do we need to get done to get to the goals we actually have in play to support, again, the kids who have been historically excluded from participation.
Yeah, I really feel that. I mean, if you're not going to run for school board, all of you all could run. You're probably overqualified and you should. You got to show up for the people who are running. And I say this again, just to underscore, we cannot have folks who are, you know, good advocates for young people and for a quality education show up alone. So I know it's hard. I mean, we all have seen the imagery, but people need a coalition community beside them to be courageous. And if we're not out in front, we definitely need to be beside and behind. Xiomara, what's next? I'm turning over to you, and I'm not seeing a lot of questions in the chat, but if you want to open up, you can take care of that. And thank you for the opportunity, Promise 54, to be with these esteemed leaders and colleagues.
Absolutely.
Before you go, just one last comment about rural Alabama to show you how things can actually happen. We took 250 people to Talladega County, Alabama, to see innovation in place. This is a school district, you know, it's so rural, there are no hotels. We had to stay in Birmingham, but they went from 50% to 98% graduation rate. You don't hear the word equity being blasted on the speakers, but everything they're doing is about equity, using computational thinking as a vehicle to getting kids to completion, to post-secondary success. So sometimes, again, like I said, the work of equity is doing the work. And sometimes if you just do the work in a place, even a place like Alabama, rural Alabama, it can actually happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
Thank you. I love that. Thanks for chiming back in with it. Jean-Claude and Heather and Kira in absentia, I cannot thank you enough for allowing us to bear witness as y'all discuss and engage in this conversation and allow us to engage with you through the chat. I also want to really remind you from the bottom, thank you from the bottom of my heart for the reminder that despite this being a really rough time to be a BIPOC leader fighting for equity in general, let alone a focus on racial justice in the education space, that we're not alone and we can support each other to move forward as a collective. So I just really appreciate all three of you so profoundly. And to all of you 70+ people who took a beat from your day-to-day, thank you for joining us in this really critical discussion. And please keep the same time slot for next week, because next Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have our last discussion in this 4-part series, where we are going to, as Kira started to move us into, interrogate what would capitalism and white supremacy culture have us believe about our worth as BIPOC leaders, as synonymous with what we produce and what we create through our labor, and how do we disrupt those pressures in this time of increased backlash and resistance. And joining us for that conversation is going to be Sharonda Bossier, the CEO of Education Leaders of Color, Ethan Ashley, co-CEO at School Board Partners, who will have some more to say on this school board conversation, and Shruti Sarah, who's a managing partner at New Profit. So come on and join us next Tuesday for the last in this series. And thank you.